Dallas Cowboys are entering year 5 of the Mike McCarthy era, and they've quietly turned into one of the elite offenses in the NFL and a fantasy football juggernaut over the last 3 seasons. But the question is, what should we expect from the Dallas Cowboys in 2024 fantasy football, and are the players worth the price tags that are associated with them in 2024 fantasy football drafts? So let's talk about it. Let's talk Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson. Let's talk about them all, and let's talk about them here, right now, in episode 19 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. The Dallas Cowboys are entering year 5 of the Mike McCarthy era. And maybe it's just me being a lifelong Packers fan and basically watching Mike McCarthy for the last couple decades. But to me, it seems crazy that he's only been there 5 years. It feels to me like he's been there forever. But in the 5 years that he has been the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, it's been mostly successful, at least over the last couple years. In each of the last 3 seasons, Mike McCarthy's Cowboys have won 12 games, and they've made the playoffs in each of the last 3 seasons. Of course, once they get to the playoffs, it's a little bit of a different story, considering they have a 1-3 record over the last 3 seasons combined. And Dallas's defense has somewhat accidentally stolen the show. They've stolen the spotlight, becoming one of the elite defenses in the entire NFL. They've been frustrating fantasy football managers that have to go against the Cowboys. They've been frustrating NFL offensive coordinators. Last year's Cowboys held opposing NFL offenses to the 5th fewest yards and the 5th fewest points. But this is a fantasy football show. Like the NBA, we're not here to talk about defense. Oh, no. We're here to talk about offense. We're here to talk about fantasy football. And from a fantasy football standpoint, Dallas's offense has quietly been an elite unit over the last 3 seasons under Mike McCarthy, largely because the Cowboys defense has been stealing the spotlight. But make no mistake, Dallas's offense, that is a fantasy football juggernaut. In each of the last 3 seasons, Mike McCarthy's Cowboys have finished top 14 or better in basically every fantasy relevant offensive category. They finished 4th or better in scoring in each of the last 3 seasons, including leading the league in scoring twice in the last 3 years. That should tell you everything you need to know, but let's keep going. They finished 11th or better in offensive yards, including 5th and 1st in 2 of 3 seasons. They finished 14th or better in rushing attempts. They finished 14th or better in rushing yards. They finished 14th or better in passing yards, including, by the way, campaigns of finishing 2nd and 3rd in the NFL in passing yards. And they finished 9th or better in passing touchdowns, including campaigns of finishing 3rd and 1st in passing touchdowns. And all of that has been in each of the last 3 years. And in 2023, when they changed offensive coordinators, they didn't skip a beat. And it was surprising to me, it was surprising to many, moving from offensive coordinator wunderkind Kellen Moore over to previously archaic offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer. And yet the Cowboys still finished top 15 in basically every fantasy relevant offensive category. They offered plenty of volume, finishing 3rd in offensive plays, including 8th in passing attempts and 14th in rushing attempts. They offered plenty of yardage and plenty of efficiency, finishing 5th in offensive yards, 6th in yards per offensive play, and 1st in scoring percentage. They put points on the scoreboard in 50.3% of their drives. They offered plenty of touchdown opportunities, finishing 1st in red zone attempts, 5th in red zone touchdowns, 14th in red zone touchdown percentage, and 1st in overall scoring. They were above average in the rushing game, finishing 14th in rushing yards and 15th in rushing touchdowns. They were elite in the passing game, and I'm talking elite in the passing game. They finished 1st in pass completions, 1st in completion percentage, 3rd in passing yards, 5th in yards per pass attempt, 2nd in passing touchdown percentage, and 1st in passing touchdowns. Top 5 in every passing game category. And heck, for those of you in leagues that award fantasy points for first downs, last year's Dallas Cowboys finished first in the entire NFL in first downs, because why not? And that includes, because of their eliteness in the passing game, that includes finishing first in passing first downs in the NFL. They were elite in basically every offensive category. They checked every single box that you could look for in fantasy football, offering plenty of volume, efficiency, yardage, scoring chances. It was all there in 2023. And thankfully, for fantasy football purposes, all of that team success showed up at the individual level as well. Dak Prescott finished as Fantasy's QB3 in 2023. Tony Pollard finished as Fantasy's RB14, which is a high-end RB2, but candidly, Tony Pollard's finish was quite a disappointment considering the guy handled 300 plus touches behind one of the best offensive lines in football, playing in one of the elite NFL offenses. Tony Pollard was drafted as Fantasy's RB6 in 2023, but finished as Fantasy's RB14. It was quite a bit of a disappointment, all things considered, but still, he finished as a high-end RB2. I actually talked all about Tony Pollard and his fit with the Tennessee Titans and what to expect from him in 2024 fantasy football. If you're interested, you can check it out right here in episode 9 of Inside the 20. But Dak Prescott was QB3, Tony Pollard was RB14, CeeDee Lamb, of course, came on an absolute torrid stretch down the tail end of the season. He finished as Fantasy's #1 wide receiver. Brandon Cooks, who had a disappointing year, still finished as a top 38 wide receiver in fantasy football. And Jake Ferguson finished as Fantasy's #9 tight end. He was a back end tight end 1 in fantasy football. All of that team success showed up at the individual level as well. So now, moving forward, heading into 2024, what should we expect from the Dallas Cowboys and how should we approach them in 2024 fantasy football? Now, refreshingly for a fantasy football analyst whose job is to predict and project what's going to happen with the 2024 season, last year's Cowboys should look relatively identical to this year's Cowboys. We should know what to expect from Dallas moving forward in 2024. Growing up, one of my favorite things to do was play Madden on my PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. And when I say play Madden, what I really mean is simulate the games and simulate the seasons, because my favorite part was managing the team, scouting prospects, doing the draft, making trades, signing free agents, and everything that goes into managing a football team and leading a franchise to glory, building it from the ground up. And if that's your type of deal, if you love that sort of thing, you're going to absolutely love GM Dynasty, which is a simulated football game that I recently started playing and instantly fell in love with. With realistic game planning mechanics and immersive features, GM Dynasty puts you in the hot seat of sports management. And it's not just a game, it's a simulation of the real deal. I invite you to get your free team and compete in Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's upcoming tournament, where there's going to be prizes for whoever wins the thing. Register your account on gmdynasty.com, and when you do, join the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football contest using the link that we left for you in the show notes. We're going to see a mostly returning supporting cast. We're going to see Mike McCarthy, Brian Schottenheimer, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson. All those guys are leading the charge just like they did last year in 2023. Now that said, there are some noteworthy changes that we need to consider and we need to discuss for fantasy football purposes. For starters, Tony Pollard, who we just talked about having a disappointing debut as a workhorse running back in the NFL, he skipped town. He fled Dallas. He's now with the Tennessee Titans. Again, I already talked all about Tony Pollard and the fit with the Titans and why he's on my do not draft list in 2024. That's all right here in episode 9. But his leaving town frees up 307 touches in one of the best offenses in football. Tony Pollard accounted for 34% of the Cowboys' offensive touches in 2023, and he's gone. Now, of course, after Dallas did not add a running back via the NFL draft, they went ahead and signed a familiar face in Ezekiel Elliott, who's already the third all-time leading rusher in Dallas Cowboys history. Now, of course, Zeke himself is a shell of himself. He's nowhere near that dominant back that we saw early in his career, but still, he is immediately penciled in as the Dallas Cowboys RB1 heading towards week 1 of 2024, and he's already a value in 2024 fantasy football drafts where he's being drafted around pick 128 overall, which is a mid-11th round pick. That is a price I'm happily willing to pay for a guy who's going to be the RB1 one in one of the best offenses in football. And then you have Michael Gallup, who after 6 up and down years with the Dallas Cowboys, he left town. He is now with the Las Vegas Raiders. That opens up the door for a guy like Jalen Tolbert, who was Dallas's 3rd round pick in 2022 from South Alabama. That makes him the Cowboys' de facto wide receiver 3, and he's well worth a late round dart in 2024 fantasy football drafts, where he's being drafted around pick 208 overall, which is an early 18th round pick. That is an easy price to pay for a guy who's going to get wide receiver 3 snaps in one of the best offenses in football. Either way, with Ezekiel Elliott in place of Tony Pollard, with Jalen Tolbert in place of Michael Gallup, either way, Vegas sportsbooks are expecting continued success for the Dallas Cowboys in 2024. The over-under is set on 10.5 wins, although it is worth noting that the juice is on the under. The Cowboys are minus 130 to finish under 10.5 wins this season, but they still have minus 220 odds of making the playoffs. They're tied with the Eagles for best odds of winning the NFC East. They have the 2nd best odds of representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. Only the 49ers are ahead of them. But interestingly enough, despite having the 2nd best odds of representing the NFC in the Super Bowl, they have the 10th best odds of winning the Super Bowl behind fellow NFC teams like the 49ers, the Eagles, the Lions, and the Packers. Just thought that was interesting. At the individual level, CeeDee Lamb has the 3rd best odds of winning Offensive Player of the Year. Dak Prescott has the 3rd best odds of leading the NFL in passing yards. And interestingly enough, Dak Prescott has the 11th best odds of winning NFL MVP in 2024, which actually feels like a significant value bet. I won't get into the details as to why that is. I already left those in my 2024 fantasy football draft guide that my customers are using to dominate their drafts and place some bets in 2024. But Dak Prescott having the 11th best odds of winning NFL MVP feels like very much a value bet to consider in 2024. Either way, TLDR, the Dallas Cowboys offense with a supporting cast that's nearly identical to the one in 2023 that finished top 15 in every offensive category, they are coming back in 2024 and they remain an elite offense and one that you want to target in your 2024 fantasy football drafts. And unlike the Detroit Lions, who we just talked about in episode 18, all of the Cowboys skill position players, including Dak Prescott, by the way, come at a reasonable cost in 2024 fantasy football drafts. Again, they are a team that's absolutely worth targeting in 2024 fantasy football. Do we have time? I think we have time. Let's talk Dak Prescott specifically real quick. All right, let's talk real quick about Dak Prescott winning MVP. Inside my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, I've not only tiered and ranked every single player in fantasy football for easy decisions, but I've also included contextual 2024 previews detailing what to expect from every single player on every single team. I've also included an interactive ADP tracker that suggests the perfect time to draft the player that you're targeting. This is one of many league-wrecking resources that 300 plus Basement Brewed Fantasy Football customers are using to outsmart their friends, dominate their leagues, take down DFS contests, and cash in on NFL bets in 2024 and beyond. Okay, and let me start by saying I am not a betting expert, and I don't claim to be. I've had some success personally, but as a business, as Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, that's not what we do. Our focus is on fantasy football, even though the lines can cross over into the betting space from time to time, and there's a lot of back and forth between the two. But again, I am not an expert, but I do want you to know I'm all about putting my money where my mouth is, and I have every intention of placing a flyer bet on Dak Prescott to win MVP at the 11th best odds, and here's why. We've already talked about the fact that he's returning to a nearly identical environment to the one he had in 2023 when the Cowboys finished top 5 in every passing game category, and that showed up at the individual level. Over the last 13 games of last season, Dak Prescott averaged an absurd 24 fantasy points per game, and the only way you can score fantasy points is by stuffing the box score with statistics, and that's what Dak Prescott did. He averaged nearly 300 passing yards per game. He averaged 2.6 passing touchdowns per game. He threw 34 touchdowns in 13 games. If you want to extrapolate that over a 17-game season, he would have finished with 44.5 passing touchdowns in a season. If you get a full season of numbers like that from Dak Prescott on a Dallas Cowboys offense that Vegas already expects to be successful when you look at their win totals, their odds of winning the division, their odds of winning the championship. When you take those kind of numbers and you put it on a successful team, Dak Prescott is absolutely going to be in the conversation for MVP, and at the 11th best odds, that's a bet I'm happily willing to toss a couple dollars on. And by the way, these are exactly the types of discussions that we're having on a daily basis inside of Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server, which is an online community. It's filled with hundreds of other sharp fantasy football brains that are dedicated to just helping each other out, helping each other outsmart our friends and dominate our leagues, helping each other take down DFS contests and cash in on NFL bets. And now for the first time ever, that online community, that Discord server, is available to you. It's available to anybody who wants access, and it costs less than one beer per month, $4.99 per month, and you get instant access to sharp fantasy football brains. And you know that every single person in that Discord server is a paid subscriber, which means you know they're good people. I mean, they're people who game seriously, and they're people who will give you good, solid feedback, good, solid advice, as opposed to some free forums where you probably just get some gut takes that really don't make a lot of sense and might do more harm than good for your fantasy football team. So whenever you're ready to join us, whether that's now when we're talking dynasty leagues, we're talking rookie drafts, we're talking dynasty trades, we're talking best ball drafts, or whether it's during the season when we're sorting through start-sit dilemmas and waiver wire conundrums and trade decisions, whenever you're ready to join us, you can do so using the link that we left for you in the show notes. And again, it's less than one beer per month to join the best fantasy football community in the entire world. If you enjoyed today's episode, then you're going to enjoy recent episodes where we've been discussing the shifting fantasy football landscape and what to expect in 2024. We've talked about NFL coaching changes, NFL free agency, incoming NFL rookies, 2024 team previews, and everything else that changed the 2024 fantasy football landscape. And all of it can be found right inside the 20 playlist on the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football YouTube channel. That's all for today, but come back every Tuesday and Friday for more league-wrecking fantasy football insights. I will see you on the fantasy football field, and I hope to see you in the basement. Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server filled with hundreds of other sharp fantasy football brains. Cheers. This brews for you.